service will be on cspan.org. Thanks for joining us on the Washington Journal. The House of Representatives is now coming into session, and that's where we're going to take you.
House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., July 14, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Daniel Webster to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from a list submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall the debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I plan to come to the floor at least once, maybe twice a week till we get our troops home from Afghanistan. I do that because I have the privilege to represent the 3rd District of North Carolina, the home of Camp Lejeune Marine Base, Cherry Point Marine Air Station, and Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. I've been privileged, since I didn't serve, to have great relationships with active duty and retired Marines in the district. And I want to share with this House, Mr. Speaker, that we continue to support a corrupt leader and a corrupt government. Just recently, the half-brother of Mr. Karzai, the half-brother named Wally Karzai, was murdered in Afghanistan. This only reinforces the fact that Afghanistan is in a fragile situation at every level of their government. It is in chaos, quite frankly. Just this week, I spoke with a Marine colonel who has been to Afghanistan 3 times. He was in my office on Tuesday, and he shared the same sentiments as the retired Marine general who has been advising me for 20 months. And recently, I emailed the general and I said, please give me your ideas of what Mr. Obama has proposed in bringing 10,000 of our troops out in July and then another 23,000 in next year, 2012. And this is what he emailed back to me, Mr. Speaker, and I read, 1, I think the timeline is too long. I think he needs to increase the number of troops coming out of country more and quicker. Another point he made in his email is get real with training an Army and police force. All we are doing is training eventual new members of the Taliban. Trainers are doing a wonderful job, but we don't have the time to make an army. And, Mr. Speaker, then it was kind of sad the way he closed. Every day somebody from our country dies. A Marine, a soldier, an airman, a Navy, whatever. Mr. Speaker, I bring posters on the floor. I have probably 12 now that I want to bring on the floor every time that I speak to remind the House that there's pain in war. The wife to my left on the poster is in tears. The little girl who's about 2 years of age, she doesn't understand why this Army officer is kneeling before her with a folded flag. But yet I would say to the little girl, when you grow older and you're old enough to know your daddy was a real hero, Sergeant Jeffrey Shearer, who gave his life for this country. Mr. Speaker, that leads me to sharing with the House an editorial that was written about 4 weeks ago by Eugene Robertson. and the title is Afghan Strategy, Let's Go. And I want to read from his editorial. Slender threads of hope are nice, but they do not constitute a plan, nor do they justify continuing to pour American lives and resources into the bottomless pit of Afghanistan. The threat from Afghanistan is gone. Bring the troops home. This again is from an editorial from Eugene Robertson. Mr. Speaker, with our nation in such a financial crisis, the people of the 3rd District of North Carolina, which I represent, ask me many times when I'm home on the weekends, why are we still in Afghanistan? Why are we still spending $10 billion a month to prop up a corrupt leader, and there's no future in Afghanistan? We're not going to change history. History has always said to these great nations like America, you go into Afghanistan, you're never going to change anything. The Congress needs to join those of us on both sides of the aisle when we debate trying to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, before I close, again, I want to make reference to the wife in tears and the little girl looking up at the Army officer, wondering, why are you giving me this flag? Young lady, your daddy was a hero. I close, Mr. Speaker, by saying to God, please bless our men and women in uniform. God, please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. God, please, in your loving arms, hold the families who have given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. God, please bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right. God, please give wisdom, strength, and courage to President Obama that he will do what is right. And 3 times, God, please, God, please, God, please continue to bless America. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, for 5 minutes.
The rancorous debate over the debt belies the fundamental truth of our economy, that it is run for the few at the expense of the many, that our entire government has been turned into a machine which takes the wealth of the mass of Americans and accelerates it into the hands of a few. Let me give you some examples. Take war. War takes the money from the American people and puts it into the hands of arms manufacturers, of war profiteers, of private armies. The war in Iraq, based on lies, $3 trillion will be the cost of that war at least. The war in Afghanistan, based on a misreading of history, $500 billion in expenses already. The war against Libya will be $1 billion by September. 50% of our discretionary spending goes for the Pentagon. A massive transfer of wealth into the hands of a few. Well, the American people lack sufficient jobs, health care, housing, retirement security. Our energy policies take the wealth from the American people and put it into the hands of the oil companies. We could be looking at $150 a barrel for oil in the near future. Our environmental policy takes the wealth of the people, clean air, clean water, and puts it in the hands of the polluters. It's a transfer of wealth, not only from the present, but from future generations, as our environment is ruined. Insurance companies, what do? They take the wealth from the American people in terms of what they charge people for health insurance, and they put it into the hands of the few. We have to realize what this country's economy has become. Our monetary policy, through the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, privatized the money supply, gathers the wealth, puts it in the hand of the few. Well, the Federal Reserve can keep creating money out of nothing, give it to banks, to park at the Fed, and our small businesses are starved for capital. Mark my words, Wall Street cashes in whether we have a default or not. And the same type of thinking that created billions in bailouts for Wall Street and more than $1 trillion in giveaways by the Federal Reserve today leaves 26 million Americans either underemployed or unemployed. And 9 out of 10 Americans over the age of 65 facing cuts in their Social Security in order to pay for a debt which grew from tax cuts for the rich and from endless wars. There is a massive transfer of wealth from the American people to the hands of a few, and it's going on right now as America's eyes are misdirected to the political theater of these histrionic debt negotiations, threats to shut down the government, willingness to make the most vulnerable Americans pay dearly for debts they did not create. These are symptoms of a government which has lost its way. And they are a challenge to the legitimacy of the two-party system. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize a dear friend and colleague, Dr. John Shank, and congratulate him on his retirement from Temple University. Dr. Shank is a tenured professor at Temple University, where he serves as the director of the Therapeutic Recreation Program within the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences. In his 25 years of tremendous service to Temple, Professor Shank has put forth a level of commitment to the advancement of the professional knowledge within the field of recreational therapy that is second to none. Without a doubt, John's outstanding scholarly successes have overwhelmingly contributed to the reputation of Temple University being regarded as the most prolific academic research center within the field of recreational therapy. Not only has Dr. Shank made tremendous contributions to his field, he has served as an outstanding teacher and role model to those students who were fortunate enough to have him as a classroom instructor or research advisor. Dr. Shank, thank you for a lifetime of academic and research achievements and for your contributions to the field of recreational therapy and Temple University. Congratulations on your retirement. Wish you well in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Speaker, members of the House, very shortly, the United States Congress is likely to consider 3 ill-conceived and ill-timed trade agreements that will do nothing to create jobs in this country. One of these agreements is with the nation of Colombia. One of our most important responsibilities as elected officials is to promote and protect American jobs and American values. We do this by ensuring that those who receive trade preferences respect essential democratic rights. These are important rights: the rights to speak out and protest, the rights to organize unions and bargain collectively, and the rights of citizens to support political efforts to improve their economic condition without reprisals. Unfortunately, we see what happens when union members in Colombia try to exercise their rights. Death squads are unleashed against union activists and union rights leaders and defenders. Union leaders are gunned down in broad daylight. This isn't yesterday's news. The intimidation and violence continue this day. There have been 17 confirmed killings of unionists in Colombia this year, according to a human rights group. Last year, 90 unionists were murdered worldwide, 49 of them in Colombia. Colombia unionists face the highest rates of murder anywhere in the world. To overcome long-standing objections to passage of the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, President Santos of Colombia and President Obama signed a labor action plan on April 7th. The plan includes deadlines for new laws that could enable workers to form unions as a means to advance social progress in Colombia. This plan has deadlines to restrict the use of cooperatives that allow employers to evade bargaining directly with their workers. It calls for new labor enforcement agencies and the hiring of additional inspectors. On the one hand, the Labor Action Plan has important elements that are necessary and valuable, and President Santos is to be commended for advancing this initiative. However, there are major gaps in the action plan. There are no benchmarks to show whether or not the new laws are on paper have been translated into laws on the ground. Will workers have greater ability to exercise their rights, to organize, to bargain collectively, and to negotiate contracts directly with employers? Will levels of violence and murder against trade unions be substantially reduced? Will employers and companies that violate the rights of workers be punished as prescribed under the new law? We don't know if these are merely gains on paper or whether they are real. And based upon the accelerated schedule, it appears that we won't be given a chance to learn if there will be real change on the ground before we consider the trade agreement with Colombia. Any trade agreement with Colombia must produce a verifiable reduction in the violence. It must protect human rights. It must end the impunity enjoyed by death squads and paramilitaries. Due to the lack of the benchmarks for progress, Colombia could still have a record year of assassinations, and the action plan would be declared a success. Under the plan, the Colombian government is supposed to be providing expanded physical protections for union activists. I met with regional and national union leaders last month who told me that little has changed on the ground. They told me they haven't received the protection. The action plan calls for hiring additional labor inspectors over the next 4 years to enforce these new laws. There is a program to relocate teachers who have received death threats. There is a program to address the backlog of thousands of union homicide cases that have yet to be prosecuted. And there is no assurance that the actions will be carried out. Last week, the Ways and Means Republicans opposed efforts to require Colombia to meet its obligations under the action plan as of the date of the free trade agreement goes into force. Without this provision, the U.S. has no leverage to assure implementation of the labor action plan. Maybe that is what the multinational corporations pushing this deal want. And since the agreement is being brought to the floor under fast track, Congress will not be able to consider amendments to make the action plan enforceable. Given this predicament, the least the administration can do is to stand behind its own action plan. The implementing legislation should require Colombia to fully comply with the plan before the agreement takes effect. The administration should confirm that compliance is on the ground through on-the-ground consultations with labor and human rights organizations. Without real change on the ground, this trade agreement is not fair to Colombian workers. They deserve the basic rights not to be subjected to threats and murder, and because they demand a better life. This agreement does not fairly represent our nation's values, and it's fundamentally unfair to America's workers. They can't compete with workers who face death squads for wanting a better working conditions. They can't compete with a country that continues to allow thousands of assassins to operate with impunity. It's past time that we as a nation stand up for American values and American workers. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Heisinger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to a great American with a legacy of being a passionate advocate for the issues that she believed in. Former First Lady Betty Ford passed away earlier this week at the age of 93. She was known as a beacon of warmth and kindness. She was also a tough lady. She's being buried today next to her husband, Jerry Ford, in Grand Rapids at the Presidential Museum. My entire family and I had opportunities to meet her over the years, and I have to say it's truly an honor now to represent part of the district that Jerry Ford had so long served in this very House. We're all deeply saddened by her passing. Mrs. Ford cared deeply about others, as evidenced in her work helping people through their addiction and recovery of chemical dependency through the Betty Ford Clinic, and her work to raise awareness of breast cancer and many other issues, all at a time when those things really were not discussed much in public. While above all, she led the Ford team as she supported her husband's service to a nation with admirable love and mutual respect, at times literally being his voice, like she did that evening that he made his concession speech in 1976. Well, this spring, at the dedication ceremony of the statue of President Ford here in the rotunda lying just beyond, we're reminded of his calm, steady leadership and his ability to reach out to others. They were always a team, and it was much a tribute to her as it was to President Ford. Again, we continue to pray for the Ford children, Susan, Jack, Mike, and Steve, and the entire Ford family as we pay tribute to their mother and the legacy that she leaves behind. Rest well, Mrs. Ford. Rest well.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, 6 days ago, on Friday, July 1st, armed men assassinated a candidate for City Council of Caldas, a town just outside of Medellin, Colombia. He was the 9th local candidate murdered over the past few months. Last Thursday, June 30th, Luis Eduardo Gomez, a Colombian journalist and witness for a high-profile investigation into links between Colombian politicians and paramilitary groups, was shot down and killed in northwestern Antioquia, an area I visited first in 2001. Gomez was 70 years old. He was returning home at night with his wife when he was gunned down. He was murdered a few days after another witness in the case was killed, and investigators for the Attorney General have said several other witnesses have disappeared. Antonio Mendoza Morales was a councilman in the Caribbean town of San Onofre, Sucre. The 34-year-old Mendoza was also a leader of the Association of Displaced Persons of San Onofre and the Montes de Maria. He was also shot and killed last Thursday night. He is at least the 11th land claims victims' rights or displaced persons leader to have been killed in Colombia so far this year. Displaced and victims' rights advocates in the Sucre region received a series of death threats during the month of June. We don't know yet whether Mendoza's killing is related to these threats, but I traveled to Sucre in 2003 and can attest to the daily violence suffered by local leaders and displaced and campesino organizations. On June 7th, Ana Fabricia Cordoba, 51, a leader of the displaced and a lands rights activist, was shot dead by an unidentified gunman while riding on a bus in Medellin. She had fled her home in northern Antioquia in 2001 after several of her family members were killed. She had been campaigning for the restitution of lands to Colombia's displaced and was a member of Ruta Pacifica, the Peaceful Path, a women's organization calling for a negotiated end to the war. In 2008, Ruta Pacifica testified before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission about Colombia's internally displaced. Cordoba, an Afro-Colombian, had been receiving death threats for months. She had asked the Colombian government for protection, but had not received any. Her children have received death threats following their mother's death. The Inter-American Commission for Human Rights condemned Cordoba's murder and expressed alarm over the increase in serious threats against Colombian human rights defenders. The situation is getting worse. Every day, I receive news about threats, murders, and disappearances of Colombian labor and human rights advocates and community leaders. Mr. Speaker, I recite this sad litany of recent murders to impress upon my colleagues that these are real people, real leaders, being murdered every single day in Colombia. Will their murderers be brought to justice, or will their deaths be just one more case that remains in impunity? Will the government's promises to their families to seek justice be fulfilled? Will other threatened leaders and their families receive real protection? I hope so, but we simply don't know yet. Promises are easy. Results take time, commitment, and political will to achieve. This morning, some of my colleagues will describe the dangers facing Colombia's labor activists. Colombia still remains the most dangerous place in the world to be a unionist. But violence against Colombia's workers happens in the context of a very threatening landscape for anyone who has the courage to organize their communities, run for public office, or stand up for the rights of the poor, the displaced, and the victims of human rights abuse. The source of violence are all the illegal armed actors, the FARC, the ELN, the paramilitaries, and criminal networks known as BARCRIM. And also, sadly, it includes members and units of the Colombian military and police. Before any trade agreement is brought to the Congress for a vote, we owe it to the brave people of Colombia to give the Santos administration time to demonstrate that it can carry out the historic reforms that it has announced as its priorities. We need time to see if the initial steps required by the U.S.-Colombia Labor Action Plan actually result in changes on the ground inside Colombia. Will workers be able to exercise their rights, organize freely, and bargain directly with their employers without the fear of death? And we need time to determine whether violence against rights defenders and community leaders is actually reduced under the leadership of President Santos, and whether greater protections are provided and prove to be effective. We need to see, and we should demand to see, results on the ground before Colombia takes up the free trade agreement. Let's use whatever leverage the U.S. has at Colombia to help end a culture of impunity and violence that by any standard is intolerable. I cannot approve an FTA on the basis of good intentions. It must be based on results. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, let me just say trade agreements should be about lifting people up, not keeping them down. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Nunley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, we learned that the economy added a meager 18,000 jobs. And our unemployment rate went up to 9.2%, far from the 6.7% that President Obama claimed it would be today if the stimulus bill had been signed into law. Far too many Americans are looking for jobs. Yet the President insists that tax increases are the way to fix Washington's spending problem. Tax hikes that will destroy jobs and destroy the confidence that our job creators need to hire new employees. To keep American jobs here, we don't need to raise taxes. We do need to get our fiscal house in order. 22 Americans search daily for full-time work, the worst sustained unemployment streak since the Great Depression. To these Americans, there's no end in sight. For them, unemployment's not a rate, it's a reality. Our job crisis has everything to do with our spending crisis and our debt crisis. If we hit the August 2nd deadline, the United States government will face what many Americans have felt: too much month left at the end of our money. We simply won't have enough money to pay our bills. Americans have had to make that decision time and time again. At the end of the month, they have to decide what to pay first: the mortgage, the electric bill, the grocery bill, or the car payment. Now, I'll be very disappointed if in making those decisions the administration chooses to play politics. We need to make sure we pay Social Security, interest on the debt, Medicare, and our troops that are standing in harm's way. American people want real solutions, and the House of Representatives has committed to a long-term plan. We voted for a budget that would make Washington start living within its means. Even the President's own Chief of Staff has said that in 5 years, Medicare is going broke. However, it's been 800 days since our friends in the Senate have passed a budget. And they have 9 House-passed jobs bills sitting in their hands, but they refuse to act on any of them. A recent poll shows that only 17% of mothers believe that their children will have a better life in the future. At every town hall meeting, I ask participants whether they think their grandchildren will live a better quality of life than they live. The response is slim. If Congress is going to be asked to raise the debt ceiling, we must have a long-term plan to fix Washington's spending problem. House Republicans have made our demands clear. We will not raise the debt ceiling without spending cuts larger than an increase in the debt ceiling. We will not raise the debt ceiling without structural reforms that restrain future spending and guarantee that we don't get into this mess again. And I'm not interested in a temporary Band-Aid. We've already voted no on raising our debt limit without significant cuts and reforms. We will not support a plan that raises taxes on hardworking Americans. We didn't get into this problem because taxes are too low. We're in this situation because of runaway spending and the failed economic policies of this administration. We need to move forward and solve this crisis in a responsible way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and honor the accomplishments of Mr. Frederick Douglass Williams III of Selma, Alabama, a great American and a trailblazing Alabamian. After more than 50 years in the floral business, Mr. Fred D. Williams III retired on June 30th, 2011. A fixture in the Selma community for more than 5 decades, Fred Williams has provided his floral expertise to countless families for weddings, funerals, graduations, and other special occasions in the 7th Congressional District of Alabama and throughout the Southeast. Fred's Flower and Gift Shop opened on October 15, 1956, and served as a vital part of the Selma community. Fred Williams comes from a family of public servants and entrepreneurs. His parents were pillars in the city of Selma and served as role models for the entire community. His mother, Miss Mary Ellen Williams, was a beloved educator, and his father, Fred D. Williams, Jr., was a wise and generous business owner. His father owned J.H. Williams and Sons Funeral Home, established in 1905 and still in operation today in Selma, Alabama. The Williams family were pioneers in a time when African-American businesses were few or non-existent. The opening of Fred's Flower and Gift Shop was an extension of his family legacy. Fred Williams spent most of his formative years in Selma. He moved with his family to Richmond, Virginia in the 1950s, where he graduated from Maggie L. Walker High School. He then went on to attend the historic Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. After graduation, he returned to his hometown of Selma and opened his flower shop in 1956. For 45 years, Fred Williams was married to Martha J. Williams, who passed away on July 15, 2003. Their marriage was blessed with 2 children, Kay Frances Williams, who is married to Earl Johnson of Alexandria, Virginia, and Kimberly Joyce Williams, who is married to John Dillon of Bloomington, Minnesota. He has 2 beautiful granddaughters, Mackenzie, who is 13, and Madison, who is 7. For over 50 years as Selma's premier florist, Fred Williams shared his creative genius creating exquisite floral arrangements, providing supreme service to his loyal customers, and serving as an inspiration to all small businesses. Fred Williams is loved, admired, and highly respected by the entire Selma community, and I am honored to call him Uncle Fred. His retirement will be a great loss to the business community, but I know that his commitment to bettering Selma will remain unwavering. On a personal note, I grew up in the Williams household, and his daughter Kim and I were childhood best friends. In fact, there is not a childhood memory that I have that does not include being with the Williams family or being in my many visits to Fred's florist. Because of the closeness of my family that we shared with the Williams family over these many years, I have always affectionately known him as Uncle Fred. Through his business and philanthropy, Uncle Fred has made an indelible mark on the community in Selma, Alabama, and I am extremely grateful for the part that he played in raising me. I would like to sincerely thank him for his fortitude and over 50 years of service. The community of Selma and the state of Alabama appreciates your public service and commitment to business excellence. Therefore, I, Terry Sewell, representative to the United States Congress from the 7th District of Alabama, do hereby recognize Mr. Fred D. Williams III for his numerous contributions to the city of Selma, Alabama. I ask those present today to join me in honoring Fred D. Williams III for his retirement and commending him for his many achievements on behalf of the state of Alabama. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I came to the House floor today to talk about the big deal. The big deal. Every time I open up a newspaper, Mr. Speaker, this week it's been talking about the big deal that's going on at the White House. I want to set the record straight here today. The big deal happened right here on the floor of this House, when the only budget that's passed in all of Washington, D.C. all year long, cutting $6 trillion in spending, was passed by this body, Mr. Speaker. That's the big deal. $6 trillion agreed upon by this United States House of Representatives. Now, I know down at the White House they're talking about the big deal is $3 trillion in spending cuts. $6 trillion, Mr. Speaker. The big deal started right here. Now, you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm a big fan of the open process that we've had in this House, where every single member of the United States House of Representatives is to come here and have their voice heard, offer their ideas, offer their opinions, and that happened in our voting process, Mr. Speaker. I have the vote tally here from that week of voting on the budget. The Congressional Black Caucus budget came to the floor of this House, was debated, considered. It received 103 affirmative votes, 103. The Republican Study Committee budget came, debated in this House, 119 affirmative budgets. The Progressive Caucus budget came, 77 affirmative votes. Congressman Van Hollen brought a Democratic alternative, 166 affirmative votes. The only budget to get 218 votes, Mr. Speaker, was the House Budget Committee budget with 235 yes votes. 235. Now, that's a budget that was laid out line item by line item by line item, so absolutely everyone in America could see what it was that we were doing to achieve these savings, to change the direction of our borrowing and our spending. Now, no one even introduced the President's budget in this body, Mr. Speaker. No one offered it. Now, the Senate brought the President's budget to a vote, and it was defeated 0 to 97. The United States Senate, Mr. Speaker, defeated the President's budget 0 to 97. Now, they brought the House-passed budget up over there. They couldn't pass that either. It received 40 affirmative votes, but they still couldn't pass the budget. As my colleague said earlier, it's been over 800 days since the Senate has passed a budget. Now, I know the President has come back out and he's talked about some alternatives, some things he would do differently from the budget that he offered in February, differently from that budget that got 0 votes in the Senate. And in a Budget Committee hearing the other day, we asked the Congressional Budget Office Director, what's the score on the President's new plan? And the office told us, Mr. Speaker, that they can't score a speech. They can't score a speech. And I think that's true. I think that's true. There's a lot of talk in this town, but there's not a lot of line item by line item by line item putting your money, your name, and your vote by where your priorities are. But this House did it, Mr. Speaker. This House did it. We're the only body in town to do it. It's the only budget in town to pass, and it's the big deal. $6 trillion over 10 years to help try to get this country back on track. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, it did it by not cutting 1 penny from the benefits that seniors are receiving today. Not one. So that seniors, even those over 55, Mr. Speaker, even those over 55 would continue to receive the same Medicare program that seniors are receiving today. So those over 55 would receive the same Social Security benefits that those folks who are receiving those benefits today. I cannot believe, when I open up the front page of the newspaper, I hear folks talking about Social Security benefits might not go out the door. Veterans benefits might not go out the door. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan that this body passed that gets those checks out the door. It is responsible in that it cuts $6 trillion in spending. It is responsible in that it bends the budget curve going forward over the next 10 years, and it gets those checks out the door. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what's going to happen over the next 3 weeks. I don't know where this town is going to go. This town is a tough town to predict. But I know that this House has put its mark in the sand. This House has brought every single Budget Committee alternative that was offered to this floor. We voted on each and every one, and the only one to pass this House was the big deal, $6 trillion, and it gets our seniors and our troops paid on August 3rd, Mr. Speaker. I encourage my colleagues to rally around that, and let's give the American people what they deserve, and that's some certainty in this budget process. And I yield back my time, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, as we have the opportunity to debate whether or not our brave young men and women are fighting in wars in foreign lands that has not been approved by the Congress. As we talk in terms of trillions of dollars as to the national debt that we have acquired, and think of ways as we can reduce it, As we look at our revenue code and recognize that it is just so totally unfair and should be reformed and revamped, millions of people have awakened this morning unable to really consider these important issues because they are without work. Millions of people have lost their self-esteem, have lost their jobs, some have lost their health insurance. Many have lost their homes, others have pulled their kids out of college. Cars have been lost for inability to pay, and creditors have been just nightmares to them. Including in this vast amount of people are African Americans, many who have served this country, hard-working people that find themselves not at the 9.2 so-called unemployment rate, but at a 16% employment rate. And this doesn't take into account the millions of people, and especially African Americans, that know that there are no jobs for them. And to be going to the unemployment office just to be counted among the faceless unemployed doesn't make sense. Included among them are veterans that some have fought for this country. Some have come home with physical and mental problems, but they have not received the support or the transitional aid that's necessary for them to assimilate in a work market that has no jobs. So many of these people have worked in local establishments, in our butcher shops, our cleaners, our shoe repair, and they are without work. So many of them are women that have toiled and raised their families without the assistance of anyone else, and they too are without work and without hope. As we think about these people and think about reduction of our spending, we find that Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security seems to be constantly referred to as entitlements, and people talk about that it has to be protected. So many mayors and governors are talking about they too have to cut their budgets. And so many African Americans, for reasons that I do not have to go into, have sought public service as a way of life because of the security that's involved in it. And so when we talk about cutting the budget and cutting the services that are provided, we're talking about a larger number of minorities that will be losing their jobs as a result of budget cutting. Whether we're talking about teachers or policemen or clerks that work in the city halls, or the communities that have governors that have slashed back the jobs. But certainly as we talk about Medicaid and Medicare, we're talking about hospitals. And all of you know, no matter where you come from, that you see a large number of African Americans working in these institutions, trying to get educations to move forward, because we know of the large number of health care providers that we need. We are proud in the city of New York to say that we have been able to train and educate a larger number of percentage of physicians than all of the teaching hospitals that we have throughout our great country. And we're proud to do that. All of a sudden we hear that some $300 billion will be cut from the hospitals that provide this care. And it's not just the beneficiaries that you and I know. They need this care, and they will be put in harm's way. But also we have to acknowledge that many of the people that work in these hospitals, a large number of them being minorities, they too would be released to join the unemployed. So while I'm praying for our spiritual leaders to protect the vulnerable, please understand that every time we cut in the budget, we're cutting someone's job, and they will join the hopeless and the unemployed. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Mrs. Schakowsky. Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to express my ongoing concern about human rights abuses in Colombia and to oppose any consideration of the pending United States-Colombia Free Trade Agreement until tangible and sustained progress is seen on the ground. Colombia has a long-standing legacy of serious and pervasive human rights violations. Trade unionists, members of indigenous groups, and human rights defenders have been particular targets for violence. Despite some positive rhetoric by the Santos administration about improving protection of human rights, serious abuses continue. In one recent incident reported by Human Rights Watch, 7 people were massacred in southern Colombia on July 2nd, reportedly by FARC guerrillas. On June 25th, another 8 people were killed also in the southern part of the country. In both cases, children were among those killed. According to Human Rights Watch, there were 17 such massacres between January and May 2011, resulting in a total of 76 deaths, a 21% increase over the same time period in 2010. Several members of indigenous groups have been targeted and killed in recent weeks as well, ranging from children to prominent community leaders. Human Rights Watch reports that 14 members of indigenous communities have been killed in 2011 in the Antioquia department alone. Other indigenous leaders have been threatened and dozens of families have been displaced. The Colombian government has to act immediately to ensure a thorough investigation into these horrific crimes and to finally end the cycle of impunity. Further, the government must take immediate steps to protect indigenous communities and other particularly vulnerable groups, as human rights groups have repeatedly demanded. Labor leaders and trade unionists also continue to be victims of serious abuses. Though the recently agreed-to Labor Action Plan commits the government, at least in writing, to take several important steps to prevent and punish these human rights violations, we have yet to see any sort of tangible progress on the ground. With recently published statistics showing that Colombia again led the world in trade unionist deaths in 2010, it is critical that we see a real reduction in violence before we even consider passing and implementing a trade deal. The Labor Action Plan is not legally binding under the FTA before us. If violence and impunity continue, the United States will have no mechanism for delaying or halting implementation of the Free Trade Agreement. The Labor Action Plan fails to require sustained, meaningful, and measurable results. Once we enact the FTA, we lose any ability to force the Colombian government to produce tangible change. Mr. Speaker, I do not support the NAFTA-style trade model illustrated in the 3 pending Bush-negotiated free trade agreements because so-called free trade has proven destructive to the American economy and harmful to workers both in the United States and abroad. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that implementing the Colombia and South Korea free trade agreements would increase the U.S. trade deficit by $16.8 billion and eliminate or displace 214,000 U.S. jobs. Particularly at a time when we should be focused on job creation, I strongly oppose all 3 FTAs, which jeopardize more jobs. Finally, I find it particularly concerning that we're considering implementing an FTA with Colombia in the absence of demonstrated progress on human rights and workers' rights. Mr. Speaker, we cannot turn a blind eye to ongoing abuses, and we should not consider the trade agreement until these issues are fully resolved. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Linda Sanchez, for 5 minutes.
To address the House for 5 minutes.
Without objection, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to address the House and the American people regarding the Colombia Free Trade Agreement and the negative impacts it will have on working families in the United States as well as Colombia. Quite frankly, I'm stumped as to why Congress is even considering this trade agreement. Colombia is the single most dangerous place in the world to be a union worker. This year, 17 trade unionists were assassinated as of mid-June. Last year, 51 trade unionists were killed in Colombia. As a member of Congress, I've traveled to Colombia to see labor conditions there firsthand. We simply can't afford to approve an FTA with a nation as unsafe as Colombia, which can't even enforce its own laws. Like many of my colleagues, I was glad to see the Obama administration negotiated a labor action plan with the Colombian government. Both morally and economically, it is imperative that Colombia address some of these concerns regarding human and labor rights for workers. The administration says the labor action plan has been met. The problem is that the labor action plan doesn't go far enough. Many of my colleagues might question whether labor conditions in a foreign country could really impact job prospects of their constituents here in the United States. Well, when you consider that for years American workers have been competing for jobs with nations that have weaker labor and environmental standards, it's no wonder that we are losing jobs here in the United States. Let me be blunt. If joining a union means putting your life on the line, there is no freedom. There is no fair competition. Without fair competition, we'll see even more American jobs shipped overseas. I think we can all agree that the last thing this country needs right now is to lose more jobs. Let me be clear. I am committed to trade. Trade can benefit our nation, our businesses, and our working families. In fact, I'm a member of President Obama's Export Council, and the goal there is to double American exports in 5 years, not to export American jobs. The fact of the matter is the Colombia Free Trade Agreement doesn't help American working families. It really benefits transnational corporations. These transnational corporations already repress Colombian workers. Nothing under this agreement makes the lives of Colombian workers better. Nothing under this agreement makes the lives of U.S. workers better. They don't get an equal share of the benefits of this free trade agreement. Why are we rushing to approve an agreement when workers in Colombia don't even want it? Even worse, once that agreement is in effect, the U.S. loses our most important leverage to see that the human rights situation improves in Colombia. So I ask again, why the rush? Congress should wait to see if Colombia institutes the Labor Action Plan as they have promised. After that, we can determine if conditions for working families in Colombia actually improve. The Labor Action Plan is a good first step, but it won't fix Colombia's problems overnight. You would hope that an international trade agreement would bring jobs with it. To give my colleagues some idea why there are problems with the Colombia FTA, the U.S. International Trade Commission doesn't predict that the Colombia FTA would create jobs. Now, the U.S. International Trade Commission always predicts very high and lofty job creation numbers for trade agreements, but even they are skeptical. That alone should be evidence for my colleagues that now is not the time for the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Congress should be focused on creating jobs, and this trade agreement doesn't pass the smell test. Although the Colombia FTA does stink when you consider that it's hard-working middle-class families who will pay the price with this unfair trade agreement. The Colombia FTA will kill jobs, drive down American wages, and drive small American companies who face unfair competition, drive them out of business. We can do better. I urge my colleagues to stop settling for not so bad and pursue a trade policy that means prosperity for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins, 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the Great Lakes are one of the most overlooked and unappreciated natural assets. They are the largest source of fresh water in the world and contain 20% of the fresh water on Earth. The Great Lakes faces many challenges: agricultural runoff, sewer overflows, and other pollution makes its way into the Great Lakes from across the Northeast and the Midwest, leading to unsafe water quality and public health concerns. Also, invasive species hitch a ride in the ballast water of ocean-going vessels like the zebra mussel, or swim up the Mississippi River like the Asian carp and threaten to alter the lake's fragile, closed ecosystem. In recognition of the importance of the Great Lakes and to combat the threats to their health, in 2010, 11 federal agencies announced a plan to implement the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, an ambitious action plan to remove toxins, clean up the lakes, and protect them from further pollution and invasive species. I am concerned that funding for this important program has been uneven. It was funded at $475 million in fiscal year 2010, fell to $300 million last year, and is funded at just $250 million in the FY 2012 Interior Appropriations Bill the House will consider next week. However, the mere existence of this special cleanup funding is evidence that Congress and the administration recognize the Great Lakes are a unique natural resource that deserves protection. In 1969, the Cuyahoga River famously caught fire, symbolizing the abysmal water quality of the water in the Great Lakes Basin. Legislation from the Clean Water Act and to Great Lakes restoration initiatives have gone a long way toward returning the lakes to good health. However, the Great Lakes face a new threat beyond water quality: the diversion or removal of water from the Great Lakes Basin. In recognition that due to national and global trends, the value of fresh water will increase, as will the incentive to remove it from the Great Lakes, the 8 states that border the Great Lakes entered into a compact with each other and 2 Canadian provinces on the use of Great Lakes water. Congress ratified the agreement, and it was signed into law by President Bush in 2008. Among the most important provisions of the compact are restrictions on the removal or diversion of water from the Great Lakes Basin. The underlying goal was to prevent any one state from plundering the fresh water in the Great Lakes. So it is with great concern that I have learned yesterday that the Ohio State Legislature had passed legislation to permit businesses to remove 5 million gallons of water a day from the Lake Erie. In New York, we are about to adopt a far more reasonable limit by requiring a permit for the withdrawal of 100,000 gallons per day. The Ohio bill, if adopted, would violate the spirit of the historic Great Lakes Compact and force a race to the bottom among 8 signatory states, which will result in an accelerated level of diversions and further reduce water level in the Great Lakes beyond the impact of Ohio businesses. Such an outcome is unacceptable. The consequence of such a large-scale removal of water from the Great Lakes Basin would have a devastating environmental and economic impact in my community. Water levels in the Great Lakes are already on the decline, and an additional large-scale removal of water will lead to algae blooms and reduced water quality, negatively impacting aquatic wildlife and the associated fishing industry, reduce recreational boating and commercial shipping activity. And in my community of Western New York, this action would threaten the progress we are making in Buffalo toward reclaiming the waterfront as an engine of recreational and economic opportunity. I wrote to Ohio Governor John Kasich yesterday encouraging that he conclude, as have his predecessors Bob Taft and George Voinovich, that this legislation poses a danger to the health of our greatest regional asset, and suggesting that veto this ill-advised legislation. I hope that he will heed that advice, and so that advocates for Great Lakes can focus attention on restoration initiative and on cleaning up the lakes instead of having to fight to protect them from massive withdrawals of fresh water for profit when the issue was supposed to have been settled years ago. Now more than ever, it is critical that the Great Lakes remains vigilant and united against the threat of water diversion. I yield back the balance of my time.
Clause 12, paren A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until the hour of 12 noon.
The House will be back in an hour to begin legislative work. The House continuing work on the fiscal